You don't have an appointment, no access code, no one accompanied you. So, what exactly are you doing here? The receptionist's voice cut through the crowded lobby like a blade. Outside, an 84-year-old man stood in the rain, soaked to the bone, clutching a yellowed folder tight against his chest. No one invited him in, no one asked what he needed. They just looked at him like some homeless drifter, abandoned by his family, clinging to a past no one remembered. It was Monday morning. The sky was thick with gray clouds, the air damp and cold like the world hadn't quite woken up after the storm. In front of the district admin office, people lined up in crisp shirts and polished shoes, rain jackets glinting under the dull light. And there, near the edge of the wall, under a narrow awning, stood a frail figure, silent, soaked, and entirely out of place. His name was Walter Hayes, 84 years old, but no one there knew his name. No one cared. To them, he was just an old man in the wrong spot, wet, trembling, and ruining the view. He wore a thick, worn canvas coat, frayed at the shoulders, faded khaki pants held up by a scuffed belt, and a pair of military-issued boots whose soles had seen too many years. His thinning hair was wet, dripping onto the tiled floor. In his hands, wrapped in a crumpled plastic bag, was an old folder battered but dry, the only thing he'd protected from the rain all morning. He didn't beg. He didn't speak out. He didn't cut the line. He simply waited, hoping for an opening at the counter to ask about a lost file. But it was his silence, his posture, that made him look suspicious. A young security guard with a Bluetooth earpiece walked over, visibly annoyed. "Sir, this area is for scheduled appointments only. Do you have a confirmation code? A ticket, no. Then please step aside. You're blocking the walkway." Walter nodded gently and stepped back. He didn't say a word, but even that small, respectful gesture seemed to irritate those watching. A middle-aged woman behind him clicked her tongue and muttered to the clerk. He's probably been abandoned by his kids, probably just looking for excuses to loiter somewhere warm. The woman at counter 2 chuckled and turned to her coworker. "This morning, some old guy came asking to photocopy an ancient household registry. Looked like it came from the Stone Age. I didn't know whether to feel sorry or call security." A man wearing a backpack leaned over and whispered, "Guys like him probably held some big title back in the day, now booted out, confused, still thinking they matter." Then someone raised their phone and started filming the camera, pointed at the soaked old man trembling beneath the overhang. The clip had only one caption, short but dripping with mockery. "When your grandpa still thinks he holds a seat in government." Walter didn't know he was being recorded, and even if he had known, he wouldn't have reacted. For nearly 2 hours, he stood under the rain without saying a word. He didn't ask for cardboard, didn't beg to be let in, didn't protest. Whenever someone walked by and splashed water on his feet, he simply stepped back half a pace. When the guard told him, "Sir, could you move in a bit so people can pass?" he nodded quietly and respectfully. At one point, a man with an umbrella handed him a crumpled bill. "Here, buy some bread. Warm yourself up. Grandpa." Walter gently shook his head. "Thank you. Sir, I just came to retrieve a piece of paper." That sentence made the man pause for a second. But then he, too, walked away. The paper Walter spoke of, wrapped carefully in that crumpled plastic folder, was now soaked at the corners. Despite his efforts to keep it dry, his trembling hands and the steady drip of water from his hair made it impossible. It wasn't a pension slip. It wasn't a request for aid. It wasn't an application for benefits. It was a military archive form, faded and creased, with a handwritten line across the top, Category 3B confirmation, war classification, codename Florence, and beneath it, a note involving off-site casualty, request supplemental record for widow designation, a single sheet to restore the official identity of the woman he had shared over 40 years of his life with. A woman who had passed quietly, like him, and who, to this day, still didn't exist correctly in the system. The rain grew heavier. Walter closed his eyes for a moment. His breathing deepened, his grip loosened, but then he tightened his hold on the file again. He stood up slowly, deliberately, with the quiet dignity of a soldier rising one last time in a drill long forgotten. No one looked at him. No one realized. that this shaking old man was once the one behind a life-saving supply mission to the Northeast in 1979. No one asked his name, because to them, he was just an old stranger in the rain, without a code, without a number, without a place. His full name was Walter Samuel Hayes, 84 years old. He lived alone in a small wooden cabin on the southern edge of Winter Ridge, a place so quiet it was forgotten by most, save for a few street vendors and the birds that passed through during early winter migrations. No one there knew that Walter once held the position of senior logistics advisor for the Special Forces. No one knew that every supply route map, every covert drop point, and every emergency evacuation plan crafted by the nation between 1968 and 1984 bore the imprint of his hand. He had once sat before a sandboard simulation of the Central Highlands, sketching food crisis zones post-war. He had drawn by hand the only viable retreat path for a medical unit when every highway had been bombed. He had made decisions in the dead of night, abandon all ammunition reserves, to prioritize food and medicine for a convoy of civilians trapped in the red zone. That was the first time someone called him, the man who kept alive those who were never allowed to die. But when the war ended, Walter vanished without a sound. No TV interviews, no public medals, no memoir. He and his wife June left the city, bought a quiet piece of land by the river, and lived between the sound of insects and the golden fall leaves that fell each year. She was a military nurse and had accompanied him on 3 evacuation missions. She had no citations, no decorations, but she had saved dozens of lives from beneath rubble during Operation Florence, a name that exists nowhere in any official history. In 1984, during their final mission, the convoy was ambushed. Walter survived. June did not. Her case was sealed with the status unknown. The only line handwritten on the internal archive read "white coat, spotted near burned vehicles." Identity unconfirmed. Nearly 40 years later, Walter still kept that charred scrap of fabric along with the memo requesting her posthumous recognition as a fallen service member. It was never approved. He outlived 7 directors of military health, 4 chiefs of logistics, 2 entire overhauls of the National Defense Database, and through all those years, no one ever remembered the name June Hayes. That day, a rainy Monday, the start of another bureaucratic week, he didn't come to reclaim his reputation. He didn't come to clear his name. He came for one reason only, a promise he had whispered on a cold winter night in 1983, just before she left on her final mission. "If you don't make it back, I'll finish the paperwork for you." 40 years later, he was still keeping that promise. And to do that, he stood in the rain, got ushered away from the government steps, stared at like some senile old man with no place left in the world. But he knew exactly who he was. And more importantly, he knew exactly who she was. The rain picked up. Winds whipped through the front corridor of the municipal office, rattling the glass doors until they groaned with each gust. Inside, people waiting on benches shifted uncomfortably as water splashed against their polished shoes. Outside, Walter still stood pressed into the corner wall, trying to make himself smaller, less of an inconvenience to anyone. His fingers gripped the old plastic sleeve protecting his documents, but the water had already seeped in, curling the edges of the pages. The paper inside was starting to crack, like old memories that had never been properly preserved. A janitor stepped out, mop in hand, glanced at him with a sideways glare, then muttered loudly enough for everyone inside to hear, "Just mopped that floor." The place floods again. And guess who they blame? These old guys love standing in the rain like it's a badge of honor. Walter didn't answer. He simply stepped back again, though the only thing behind him now was a cold concrete wall. A young man in a sky blue dress shirt, clearly a junior clerk, came barreling out the door and nearly bumped into him. He recoiled like he'd just brushed against something filthy. "Jesus. When was the last time you washed that coat?" he said, wrinkling his nose. Then he turned to his colleague and said, loud enough for others to hear, "Swear to God, he smells like moldy sardines wrapped in Cold War nostalgia." Laughter echoed from 2 or 3 corners of the lobby. A woman sitting near the door gently pulled her child closer and whispered, "Sit farther from that old man. What if he's carrying something? At reception desk, number 3. The clerk glanced at Walter, her eyes tinged with disdain. "Do you even know how to look up your ID code? Do you have a smartphone? Is anyone here with you? This office doesn't accept paper submissions. You need to schedule through the app." Walter slowly opened his mouth. "I don't have a phone, but I just need to ask." She cut him off, voice rising. "No phone, no ID, no appointment. Then why are you here? This isn't a walk-in help center, sir." The waiting room turned to look. Some shook their heads. Others sighed as if being forced to watch something uncomfortable. A man in his 50s, seated near the aisle, leaned toward the woman beside him and murmured, probably abandoned by his kids. No one left to care for him, so now he wanders in, hoping to get some benefits paperwork sorted out. The woman nodded, her tone certain. You can just tell by the look of him. People like that hold on to old files like they mean something, as if the past still matters. Outside the building, a high school student walking past saw Walter standing motionless under the rain, holding his soaked file. The boy pulled out his phone and started recording a short story clip. "Found my grandpa. Guys, still waiting for national orders to come through." The caption read, "Senior citizen appoints himself hero, awaits national recognition." The likes started piling up in minutes. Through it all, Walter didn't respond, didn't complain. Every so often, he just clenched his grip around the file, his eyes drifting toward the glass doors as if waiting for something beyond logic to arrive. None of them knew that the man they mocked for smelling like an old war museum had once kept an entire national supply line from collapsing. None of them knew the man they had just laughed at was the one who chose to prioritize food and medicine over ammunition during a time when the country had fuel left for only 3 final convoys. And none of them knew that he didn't need them to believe in him. He only needed them, not to stand in the way of the last promise he had yet to keep. It was 10:11 a.m. While the others continued scrolling their phones, chatting quietly about paperwork and ID verifications, in the back corner of the data entry desk, a young woman was quietly watching the old man beneath the awning. Her name was Mira Nguyen, 22 years old, a final-year intern majoring in public administration. Gentle in appearance, with her dark hair tied low at the nape of her neck, no makeup, and a pair of plastic frame glasses that made her almost invisible in a crowded room. She didn't talk much, didn't interrupt conversations. Her task that morning was simple to digitize backlogged paper records into the system. But Mira had a habit: she paid attention to people in the most literal sense. She didn't trust paperwork, not fully, and certainly not appearances. She watched for hands that trembled when passing documents and eyes that darted when telling lies. And this morning, she had been watching that old man for 2 straight hours. She saw that he never begged for money, never once looked around for pity, never moved from his spot, even after being pushed away from the overhang 3 different times. And when their eyes accidentally met, he simply nodded, a polite nod so respectful she almost felt like she was greeting an old professor. She didn't ask her supervisor, didn't seek permission. She simply picked up her barcode scanner, stepped quietly out from behind the counter, walked to the door, and stood in front of the old man. Then she asked gently, "Is there anything I can help you with?" Sir Walter looked surprised. His gaze remained calm, polite as ever, but something in his voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "I just need to ask if this file still exists. It's very old." He opened the wrinkled plastic bag and carefully pulled out a thin, battered bundle of documents preserved like something sacred. Mira took it with both hands as if she were holding a piece of cloth from a battlefield shrine. The first page was almost unreadable, but at the bottom corner, she spotted a faded green stamp, an old emblem of the Department of Defense just barely legible above a line of blurred ink that read, "Codename Florence, Region Code A7 Delta. File status pending review, combat medic, deceased in line of duty." Mira looked up. She had heard of Operation Florence during a special military seminar her professor once invited her to, a campaign never officially disclosed in public media. But that name still appeared in the ethics and public service training for internal administrative officials, one of the longest-standing unresolved humanitarian cases in nearly half a century. She swallowed hard and returned to her desk. She opened the encrypted data interface, one that only select internal personnel could access under urgent conditions. She typed in every legible number from the fragile documents. The screen flashed red with a message, "Restricted information, high-level access required, file linked to classified operation FLRA-7. Contact Department of Defense Archives for further action." Mira sat up straighter. Her access level wasn't high enough, but her supervising professor, he did have clearance. A man who had once served as a regional strategic advisor. A man who once told her during her internship, "If you ever come across a file labeled FLRA-7, don't send it through the usual administrative channels. Call me." She didn't hesitate. Mira grabbed her personal phone, walked quickly to the third-floor women's restroom where the signal was strongest and made the call. The entire call lasted 47 seconds. The voice on the other end asked only 3 questions. Then, nothing else. Just the sound of an engine starting. 27 minutes later, a government-plated SUV rolled to a silent stop in front of the main administrative building. No sirens, no fuss. But everyone stopped what they were doing, instinctively. A man in a dark suit stepped out. No name tag, no government badge, only a gold-plated credential bearing the seal of the Executive Office of the President of the United States. He walked directly through the public service lobby, eyes scanning the room until they locked onto desk number 3, the same desk where the young clerk had rejected Walter earlier that morning. His voice cut through the air, calm but unyielding. "Who turned away, Walter Samuel Hayes this morning." The building froze. The clerk fumbled. The security guard backed away, startled. Murmurs broke out among those waiting in line. "What's going on?" And outside under the awning, Walter still stood, unaware of the weight that was now moving toward him. The silence inside the lobby thickened to the point of suffocation. No one moved, no one spoke. The presidential envoy remained where he was, eyes fixed like a blade on the front desk, where the young staff member now stood frozen, face lowered, barely breathing. The security guard tried to open his mouth to explain something, anything but the envoy simply raised a hand. Just a small motion, but enough to stop him cold. "Mr. Walter Samuel Hayes, currently standing outside this very building in the rain, is a former national-level logistics advisor, the man who personally reviewed and approved critical survival strategies during Operation Drift, 1979. The envoy's voice was not loud, but it carried. It was he who chose to divert fuel supplies away from military weaponry in order to prioritize food and medicine for over 12,000 civilians trapped in the eastern flood zone. His words echoed through the room, silencing even the buzz of the ID scanners. Without his decision, medical evacuation units would not have lasted more than 72 hours, and the casualty count would have moved beyond hundreds, into the thousands. The entire room went still. Even the air seemed to pause. He once held cabinet-level clearance. He authored protocols classified until 2075 that many of you rely on today for emergency response and citizen intake. This morning, this man was told to stand outside, in the rain. Because no one here recognized the man who wrote the very framework you now use to decide who is worth serving. From the corner of the room, Mira, the young intern, stood motionless. Her hands clutched the edge of her blouse, eyes fixed on the frail old man still outside the glass doors. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she did not look away. A mid-level supervisor rushed down from the second floor, clearly flustered, likely trying to intervene. But the envoy cut him off with one clipped sentence. "This incident will be reported directly to the executive office. It will be formally recorded as a case study in the misjudgment of a public citizen." Then he pulled out a black leather folder, retrieved a folded document stamped in red, and held it up. "This is the reinstatement certificate for the Florence campaign file. Case number A7 Delta. Personally authorized by the Secretary of Defense." He paused for a moment. His next words slowed as the weight of history returned to the room. "It is the formal recognition of the late June Hayes, a field nurse who gave her life during the final extraction of 1984. As of this morning, her name is no longer missing." He turned and stepped toward the entrance. Every eye in the lobby followed him, as if drawn by a silent current now pulling the room in one direction. Mr. Walter still stood there, his hands gripping the worn folder, eyes slightly confused, unsure of what was happening. His legs trembled, and instinctively, he stepped back like someone being called out to take the blame, not someone about to have the truth returned to him. The presidential envoy approached him, bowed his head gently, and said, "Sir, may I escort you inside?" Walter lifted his head, his lips moved as if to say something, but instead, he simply nodded. He didn't rush, he didn't show emotion, he just walked slowly, steadily like he had walked down military infirmary halls, across frontline paths, and through places where people had long forgotten who their debt of gratitude belonged to. The front doors of the government building swung open, and for the first time that morning, every single person stepped aside to make way for an 84-year-old man in a faded coat and rain-soaked shoes. That afternoon, an emergency meeting was held behind closed doors. Walter Hayes's name was quietly restored in the national records, but no memo was sent out, no banners were hung, no applause. Only one silent note was added to the Federal Archive Management System special file, handle, according to Hayes protocol, never repeat this mistake. And some people don't come to demand anything. They come only to keep a promise that the rest of the world had long forgotten. If this story made you pause even for just a moment, please share it. Share it so that those who were once dismissed with condescending stares are remembered with the respect they always deserved. And if you believe that honor doesn't lie in what we wear, but in what we quietly protect, then subscribe. Because we'll keep telling the stories of those who are no longer spoken about, but should never, ever be forgotten.